Oh, I was there. And it was a good one. It was either side.
There's more and more interest, and certainly would have been fun if this had passed here in 91. I actually just learned recently about the state senate race. Well, those things. New bill.
You holding a video camera?
Yeah. I got you already.
I didn't know it.
You would have acted real differently, wouldn't you?
Congratulations. Thank you. Congratulations. Very good to see you. Thank you for all your service.
Jack, how are you?
I'm great. No need to ask you how you are. You look great.
I want to thank you for that very generous, kind letter you wrote.
Welcome. Thank you for inviting me to your home. At least I got. Well, they didn't arrest me coming up neither. Oh, as long as they act right. Is that right? You got a lovely home.
I guess we need to do something with it. Hi, Jay. Hold on to them because I'm the only one. I saw you on TV. Hi. How
you doing? Good. How are you?
It's on. You just have to quiet down.
I'm lost my job. I'm going to retire.
My name is Marian and Spencer, and I'm so glad to see each and every one of you. We have with us tonight a young man by the name of Rob His office is in Washington, D.C. We're going to ask Rob if he will come forward at this time and bring us greetings. Rob, where are you?
I'm coming.
All right. The crowd is wonderful. Democracy. He has some thoughts to share with you.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. It's quite a crowd, and I think it's quite an event that we're trying to do here to honor former Mayor Theodore Berry and our guest Lani Guinier. We have paired them because Lani was actually the winner in 1993 of our Champion of Democracy Award, and we were never able to present that award because of her very busy schedule. So we're actually going to be presenting her with that award tonight as well. And there's many people to thank. We also want to move quickly through the program to hear our main speakers, but Bobby Stern deserves great thanks for opening our house to everyone. And Marian Spencer, who is one of our board members and has done yeoman's work here, and Nancy Minson with the Cincinnati Women's Political Caucus really made this event happen, and I want to thank them for that. Just briefly, the Center for Voting and Democracy is a relatively young organization with its roots in some ways right here in Cincinnati. We were founded in 1992, right in Cincinnati, with people who cared about this issue of proportional representation coming together. People from 17 states gathered in the wake of the 1991 campaign to try to restore proportional representation. And Mayor Berry was the one who sort of invited people to the city and started us off on what has been a rather remarkable 2.5 years. There's been a lot of headway on this issue, in large part because of the work of Lani Guinier, so that it's nice to have her tonight as well. That pairing makes a lot of sense. The Champion of Democracy Award is an award to honor work on this issue of proportional representation and what it means as far as electoral fairness. And the Champions is an accurate term for our winners tonight. And for those who want more information on the center, we have some in the back. And once again, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Rob. At this point, I'd like to ask where Bev Paul is.
Right here.
Okay, Bev, introduce our dignitaries.
Good evening. I'm Beth Paul. I'm the chair of the Cincinnati Women's Political Caucus. And on behalf of the caucus, I'd like to thank the Center for Voting and Democracy for inviting us to co-sponsor tonight's event. And I'd also like to say that it's an honor to be a part of such an important presentation. I've got an awfully short list of elected officials for such a big crowd. I have a sinking feeling you're not all on here, but let me go through the ones I have. Of course, Council Member Bobby Stern, Council Member Dwight Tillery, Tyrone Yates, Todd Fortune, and Judges Nathaniel Jones, Jack Sherman, Bob Gorman, Judge Gilligan, and excuse me, I'm sorry. And under the council members, I didn't mention Charles Winburn, who's here as well. Who did I forget? Is there anybody here who wants to introduce himself or herself?
Privilege to present our 1994 Champion of Democracy Award. The person we're honoring is a living legend. He's Cincinnati's treasure. Ted has consistently championed the cause of the underprivileged and the underrepresented. He chaired the Ohio Committee for Civil Rights Legislation, was a member of the Judicial Council for United Methodist Church, established and was the first president of the Cincinnati Community Action Agency. Later, he was appointed by President Johnson to be the National Director of the Community Action Programs. Past president and current director of the Cincinnati Southern Railway, assistant prosecuting attorney for Hamilton County. He also served as a morale officer in the U.S. Office of War Information. He has served and is serving as director of the Southern Ohio Bank and is a member of the Chamber of Commerce. An effective advocate for change, elected to council 7 terms, serving as our mayor and vice mayor. He gave over 40 years to the fight for proportional representation in this, our Cincinnati community. I think it's fair to say that Ted kept proportional representation alive in this community. Tonight we honor him especially for that effort. For in promoting proportional representation, he fought for all the voters, that we share equally in the dream of a functioning democracy and elect leaders of our choice. He was our choice. Tonight we honor him with this very special award as Champion of Democracy, presented by the national organization Center for Voting and Democracy. And we have to share in that presentation the previous national winner, Lani Guinier. I would like them both to come up at this time. This is for you. Lani.
A year late.
And $1 short. This is the community in which these awards should be presented. Congratulations.
I think I should yield the
Don't give
floor.
the mic, kid.
Yeah, so that everyone in the house can hear.
I think it appropriate to yield the floor and speaking space to our honored guest, Professor Lani Guinier. I'd like to hear her myself, and then I'll give some brief remarks regarding the presentation of this award to me. I'm, to say the least, honored, and I want to hear from Lani, since she is our guest today at the University of Cincinnati in a very important series of lectures, and we're happy to welcome her to Cincinnati. Ms. Guinier.
Well, I think Marian Spencer said it when she said, "This is the place where you have to come to get this award." I would like to say something actually about Rob Ritchie. Rob Ritchie is an unusual person who is absolutely selfless in his commitment to the cause of trying to make America live up to her democratic ideals. And I wrote a piece recently in the New York Times Magazine. I don't know how many of you have had any dealings with the New York Times. I've had dealings with the New York Times on a number of different levels. My father actually was an elevator operator for the New York Times in the 30s because he had been an editor of his high school newspaper And when he went to Harvard College, the editor and publisher of the Times came to Harvard and invited all of the editors of their high school newspaper to a meeting and offered all of them jobs for the summer if they just showed up in New York. And my father showed up in New York, and he was told, well, we don't allow blacks beyond the first floor. And he persisted. He said, no, the publisher has offered me a job, and he finally did get to take the elevator up to the floor where the publisher's offices were, and the publisher said, well, you're right, I did offer you a job, and you can run the elevators, which is what my father ended up doing. And the reason this is such a long story is because when I was in high school, I was an editor of my high school newspaper, and I was awarded a National Achievement Award through the National Merit Corporation, and it was co-sponsored by, of all places, the New York Times. So my father said, well, call them up and see if you can get a job. So I did. And I called and I said, and well, you know, my father worked for you. And they said, oh, really, what did he do? And I said, well, he ran the freight elevator. And they went, checked the records, found, oh, yes, Lani Guinier was one of our employees, and they gave me a job in personnel. And then when my nomination was pending for Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, the New York Times was not particularly kind to me in its editorial policy, in part because they felt that some of my law review articles talking about proportional representation and cumulative voting and alternative remedies that might be more palatable and also ultimately bring a more participatory and more accountable government, they felt that those were a little threatening. And during the period of the nomination, I had an opportunity to go and meet with the editorial board, and I think over the course of time they've somewhat mellowed in their attitude, and indeed they gave me a great platform a year ago to write a piece about my nomination, and then this year they called and said, well, we'd like you to write a piece about gerrymandering, about racial gerrymandering, and whether the creation of these majority black districts contributed to the Democratic defeat in the November '94 election. So I wrote this piece, but with the New York Times it's never easy, and so I wrote this piece, and then the fact checker called. And she wanted to check out all of the different assertions I had made, and I said, well, many of these claims came from Rob Ritchie. So why don't you call Rob? I don't know how she found you because you were in North Carolina at the time, but she tracked you down, and I think the two of you actually developed quite a cordial relationship. She said, you know, Rob Ritchie, he's fantastic. And no matter what I would say about something, unless Rob also confirmed it, it was not factual. So he was able to establish enormous credibility with the fact checker of the New York Times Magazine, which is not an easy thing to manage. And I don't know how many people work with the Center for Voting and Democracy, but you are a singular figure in the community of people who are really committed to genuine democracy, and I want to just take this opportunity to thank you for not only helping me with my facts, but also just constantly. Rob is also a source of facts, F-A-X, and I don't know if you've been on his facts chain, but he will let you know whatever is happening and then tell you if you want to know more, here's where you call. So it's a wonderful network to be part of. I am committed to democracy as conversation. I am committed to participatory democracy as part of a genuine interactive conversation. And because I am so committed to democracy as a conversation, I don't want to do all the talking. And I would really like to open the conversation up so that we can talk to each other. I'm here not only to honor Mayor Berry, not only to thank Rob Ritchie, not only to receive my award a year later, but to learn from you, because I see this as a community that has really struggled with the idea of proportional representation, alternative forms of representation, really thinking about what a genuine democracy might look like. So I'd like to learn from you. I'd like to invite you to make comments, ask questions, however we can get the conversation going. Yes?
Ms. Guinier, you asked how many people work in our office at the Center for Voting and Democracy. As far as I know, and incidentally, I'm Dorothy Kinross, Rob works up there alone. Is that correct, Bob? Are you the only person in the office? And he is a volunteer. He does not get paid. We are a fledgling organization depending on donations, and we are having a rough way to go, but he, as far as I know, don't you volunteer your time?
Well, it started off that way. Though actually, I am the center's one paid staff person, but one point that, and I actually do get some money now, which is nice. But there is this remarkable network of people who care about this issue, and I'm not sure that's something that people in Cincinnati really realize, that actually there are other people who know about proportional representation, and there's people who, most of them have full-time jobs, but are doing absolutely remarkable work. And just this week, for instance, Lee Mortimer, who Lani knows from his work in North Carolina, helped persuade a legislative commission to unanimously recommend that localities have the option to use proportional representation. And so North Carolina may open the door to many places looking at these ideas. Just one of many examples. Things are happening, and so I am very honored to receive your praise, but it is part of a remarkable group of people that certainly includes Marian Spencer and many others right here in Cincinnati.
Lanny?
Yes.
My co-chair, Nancy Minson, wants to introduce you. So I think we ought to give her the right for a big question at this point. She has earned that right tonight.
Yes.
Well, no, you can make a statement.
Actually, I got to introduce you last year, so it's at the Women's City Club event that featured Professor Guinier, so I don't have to do it again. It's nice that you're so well known. The situation that we have in Cincinnati is that...
Nancy, can you use the mic?
Yeah. Can we take it off?
Yes, you can.
Let me
just...
Yeah.
It's okay, I'll just... In Cincinnati, can you hear me? In Cincinnati, we have a situation of trying to create voting reform, and yet it's difficult to sell proportional representation, even though this is the home of proportional representation. We've done it so much. Even some of our traditional supporters are now going toward districts, supporting districts and other forms. Do you have any advice on what we could do to try to encourage a more equitable form of voting in our community?
I'm a law professor, not a politician or even a crusader. So that's a hard question. But one of the things that I have thought about is trying to link up the notion of PR or some form of alternative election system to term limits. I have reluctantly started to see some of the values in term limits, not only as an organizing tool, but actually as a way of ensuring greater churn in the number and type and diversity of people who are citizen legislators. And I think that term limits have really caught on with the American people because they feel that it's a clear way of ensuring accountable government. And proportional representation is also a way of ensuring a more accountable form of government. So I think if there's some way to link it up so that this is simply the next step beyond term limits, and it's related to term limits because it's a way of ensuring that those who are elected don't become entrenched in their own individual careers, but are elected to represent a particular viewpoint, and if they don't act on that view, if they are not carrying out the mandate of their electors, then proportional representation gives the voters more of the choice and more of the power and more of the opportunity to express themselves at the ballot box. So that's one possibility. I also think that it needs a new name. I think part of the problem with proportional representation...
Single transferable.
Well, and that's not the new name. Single transferable vote is not the new name. But I think with all of the energy and commitment in this room, you put your heads together. One of the things you may have read about, or certainly one of the people that I'm sure you all have read about recently, is Newt Gingrich. And I admire something that he did in 1982 after the Republicans lost 26 seats in the House of Representatives. And he went to visit his mentor, Richard Nixon. And Nixon said, well, what you need to do in terms of trying to pursue some of the reforms that you're supporting is to meet regularly. And Nixon proposed that they meet once a month, and Gingrich decided that wasn't regularly enough, and so they started to meet once a week. And one of the first things that they did was to figure out what to call themselves, and they spent many meetings going over the name of what eventually became the Conservative Opportunity Society. And each word had significance, and I think on some level it will be through the process of a ongoing, deliberative, and interactive exchange that you will come up with a new name for what is a very important and very democratic reform. Are there any other comments, questions? A comment?
After the others, I'll make my response.
Yes.
A very similar thing to PR is cumulative voting. It's easier to understand for simple minds like mine. Would you contrast the two and tell us which one you prefer and why?
Well, first of all, I'm impressed that you think cumulative voting is easy to understand. I've had a lot of trouble trying to get the American people to agree with you. Cumulative voting is essentially, and taking the word cumulative, it's essentially giving each voter the opportunity to stack or accumulate their votes in support of a position or an individual that they feel strongly about. And it's an opportunity that gives a minority, a self-identified minority, whether it's an ideological minority or a racial minority, a geographic minority, the opportunity to concentrate their votes to support someone who will represent their issues. And it's certainly, in my view, preferable to using racially homogeneous districts to represent a racial minority because it provides, just as I suggested to Nancy, the opportunity of forming larger coalitions, not only in the electorate but also in the legislature. Now, Rob can tell you much better than I can all of the different permutations of PR, and maybe, knowing Rob, he probably brought a few charts and can lay them out. One of the best charts that Rob has done is a chart in which he shows the different kinds of election systems across the world, and then positions the United States at the most majoritarian in the sense of winner-take-all majority rule, 51% get 100% of the power. And then at the other extreme is Israel, where 1% of the voters are assured some representation in the Knesset. And then he lays out all of the different alternatives in the middle. And maybe he'd like to verbally describe the chart, since he doesn't seem to be making any move to take it out.
Right, I don't have it here. Well, let me just add a quick word. Proportional representation, I think, as Lani says, is a confusing term. And the way we are trying to talk about voting systems is measuring the percentage of voters who can help elect someone, so that you can look at it that way. Like, if it's only 51% of voters might only help elect someone, and for instance, the current Cincinnati system, that could happen, versus in a proportional representation system where no fewer than a certain amount will help elect someone. Say in Israel, it's going to be no fewer than 98 or 99%. In the old Cincinnati system, about 90%. So that that's one way of measuring proportional representation. Cumulative voting and what we call preference voting, proportional representation, have actually the same percentages, can help elect people, and then there are just some differences on how the systems function and how well they are likely to sort of do what voters want them to do, and we can get into those kinds of permutations. But there is a movement to look at these systems. One stat I just wanted to throw out, as Lani says, I do like statistics, is you can call our system a majoritarian system. However, if you think about it in one way, it doesn't really stand up that way. For instance, in 1994, 21% of eligible voters in the United States helped elect someone to the U.S. Congress, meaning 79% either didn't vote or voted for losers. In a country like Germany, which had its election in October, it was about 76% of eligible voters helped elect someone. So you have a different kind of legislative body that in some ways actually better represents the majority than a system here, which we don't really know if it's only 21%. And that's been true for quite a long time. I don't know how long Lani wants to answer questions. Would you like to keep doing so? I'm sure people have some questions, but I also want to hear from Ted too. But yes?
One of the things that plagued us, I think, in proportional representation is the length of time it took to count the vote. Is there any modern method of doing that more effectively and timely?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'll just quickly answer that one. Yes. We have computerized the vote count. We just did a study for the city of Cambridge, which uses proportional representation. And you can do the ballot count in all of 90 seconds using a computer program. And we have now done it and shown that it works, and it works accurately. So that big problem is now dealt with.
What does it cost?
The program is yours for $1 billion. No, we would definitely make that available for at cost, no cost.
That was something about Washington we don't know.
The question was, tell us something about Washington that we don't know.
In your article in the Times on gerrymandering, you indicated that 50.1% of those voting got all the winners in a single-member district. But I think it's much worse than that, because oftentimes when the vote is split among more than two candidates, in fact, a majority of the voters are denied the candidate of their choice. For example, when Alphonse D'Amato was elected in New York, polls made it clear that he would have lost to the Democratic candidate, he would have lost to the other candidate, and I'd like you to talk a bit about the injustice of multi-candidate first-past-the-post plurality elections. It isn't that the majority get their will, it's the strongest minority. And when you go and put that together in a multi-member district, as we have now in Cincinnati, it simply compounds the problem by having that largest minority elect everybody. In fact, it's rare that a candidate gets a majority of the votes cast.
I agree.
One thing that we missed by not sort of formally introducing Lani is to give her a chance to talk about her new organization. And I was thinking that since many people don't know that Lani has formed a new organization that is doing some exciting work, perhaps you might want to say a few words about Commonplace.
Okay. We're not going to yes, trap you. I have started a new nonprofit called Commonplace that is dedicated to connecting citizens, communities, and ideas. In part because of my own experience working as a civil rights litigator for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and then my experience in Washington, D.C., where I'm sure you know pretty much all that happened to me during that period. When I was litigating with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, it seemed to me that the civil rights movement had lost a lot of the moral high ground in talking about issues of racial discrimination. And in part, the reason the civil rights movement had lost the moral high ground is that the lawyers were playing too much of a leadership role. And the emphasis on litigating cases to resolve serious and pervasive societal problems was polarizing the discourse and also muzzling and silencing many people who otherwise were very sympathetic. An adversarial approach to problem solving, which litigation inherently embodies, may not be the best way of trying to get people to move beyond their differences and their polarized way of thinking about those differences. And it seemed to me we needed to do more advocacy in the court of public opinion and less in the court of law. So that was one source of inspiration. And then, of course, I got to Washington and I saw what I call adversarial creep. This was not just about lawyers who were polarizing the discourse. This was also about politicians and journalists. And particularly when we're talking about an issue like race, where we don't have many opportunities to have a conversation across difference. We don't live next door to each other. We often don't go to the same schools. We don't even watch the same television shows. They did a study of the top 10 shows watched by blacks and whites, and there was not a single show that was on the list for both blacks and whites. And they had to then expand the list to the top 20, and then they found there were 2 shows that both blacks and whites watched if you went up to 20, and the first one was Monday Night Football, and the second was 60 Minutes. And both of those take, in different ways, a very adversarial approach to problem solving, right? It's all about deciding who's winning and winning all, and determining who's losing, and then we're going to demonize the loser. Well, in my particular case, I was a living embodiment of that phenomenon, where essentially I was demonized, not for things that I had said, but I was demonized because of who I was and what I was allowed to represent, because the administration failed to define me and allowed their political opponents instead to define me. So it seemed to me we needed to create some kind of intermediate space where we could have a different kind of conversation, a different kind of dialogue, a different kind of interaction. Not because talking is the solution to our problems, but it's certainly a necessary precondition. If we can't even talk to each other, we certainly can't work together. And we certainly will not collaborate in terms of our common set of goals. So Commonplace is committed to having conversations about race and also about gender. I teach a class at the University of Pennsylvania on race and gender, and have found that putting those 2 issues together has created some really interesting dynamics, in part because of who comes to the class, in part because of the style of conversation. We don't have a single authority figure who is dominating the conversation. We really try and allow the students to facilitate the conversation. We rotate leadership. We do lots of the things that we would like to see in a genuine democracy. And we find that students come to the conversation and learn to trust each other and learn to collaborate and find new ways of solving problems. And I just want to give you a couple of examples, because I'm sort of proud of this class, which is the model for this organization. We were talking about experiences that each of us have had where we felt threatened or victimized or put down because of who we were. And one young woman talked about her growing up as a faculty brat and her father taking them to London, and she was the new kid in the class, and a girl, she was in 4th grade, and a girl who was right in front of her every day on their way to recess used to turn around and just slap her in the face every day. And she couldn't understand why this was happening. She didn't talk to anybody about it. And finally, she decided that she was just going to confront the girl and say, "Why are you doing this? Stop!" And the girl stopped. That was her contribution to the conversation. One young guy, a white guy, talked about being mugged by a group of black and Latino youths. He was a student at the Bronx High School of Science in New York City. And he was on his way to get some lunch at the delicatessen, and he described the trauma of being mugged by these neighborhood kids. And nobody said to him, "Oh, Mike, that was a racist story, and why are you telling that story?" They accepted it with the same tolerance that they accepted Amanda's story about being slapped every day by somebody who happened to be standing in front of her in the line for recess. And we went around the classroom, and a young black woman said, "Well, I want to respond to Mike's story." She said, "I get the impression that Mike thought he was talking about race when he told that story, and that the reason that these black and Latino kids mugged him is because he was white and they were not." She said, "I'm black, I went to Brooklyn Tech, which is also a magnet public school in New York City." And she said, "And those same kids used to harass us on the subway. They saw that we had slide rules coming out of our book bags, and they called us the techies." She said, "It's not about race, it's about class." And it was a really important moment in this conversation. One, because Mike felt safe in telling his story, and in the process of telling his story, then the young black student told her story, which gave him information and a perspective on his story that he hadn't had. So it's a really important moment. But we don't just talk in this class, we also try and solve some problems. We take problems, and I talked earlier today about a problem that I feel the class solved somewhat creatively. And that's the Lowell High School situation in San Francisco, which is, I'm sure, going to get more publicity because a group of Chinese Americans are challenging it as a magnet public school, and pursuant to this consent decree, there's a cap on the number of any one racial or ethnic group that can attend the school, and pursuant to that cap, Chinese Americans have to score higher than any other group in order to get into the school. On a sliding scale, you need perfect score is 69. If you're Chinese American, you need to get a 66 to get into the school. If you're white or Asian American, you need a 59, and if you're black or Latino, you need a 56. So Chinese Americans are challenging the consent decree, saying it discriminates against them, and a group of African Americans are defending the consent decree, saying that without this consent decree, you won't have a diverse population that represents the richness of the diversity of San Francisco. So I presented this problem to the class after we had had a number of conversations, and I said, this is really not about deciding who's right and who's wrong. It's about thinking through the problem to come to a new paradigm. And they came up with the solution of using a lottery. Anyone with 56 or above would be eligible to compete in the lottery, 56 being the lowest score that the school now admits students. But if you had something that the school valued, if you got a perfect score of 69 and the school could show that those who get perfect scores of 69 are more likely to get Westinghouse Science fellowships or are more likely to become justices of the United States Supreme Court like Stephen Breyer, or they play the trombone and the school needs people in the band to play the trombone, then put their names in the lottery twice or 3 times to enhance their chances of being selected. It's not a perfect solution, but I see it in many ways the way I see cumulative voting. It's a way of recognizing the legitimacy of concerns on different sides of the debate and trying to take those legitimate concerns and forge a new way. That's what commonplace is about. I think that's what proportional representation is about. The value of diversity in terms of bringing variation and innovation to the problem of collective problem solving.
Thank you.
Marian, I don't want to extend this too much longer, and I want to hear from Ted, but there is actually something that we did do that you don't know about. And Bobby's going to come up here. But our board of directors, which is headed by Matthew Casalata, who's at Pepsi-Cola in New York, and other members, wanted to honor two people for all the work that has happened in Cincinnati. And that there is a long tradition of work for proportional representation, and it crosses generations. And Ted Berry is one champion of democracy, and I just wanted to turn this over to Bobby.
Turn around so they can see you. I just have to have this because I can't ever remember all the things that Marian's involved in. As many of you in this house know, Marian grew up in Gallipolis, Ohio. She's the granddaughter of a freed slave. Really spent her life engaged in civic pursuits, and she's worked tirelessly to see that people are involved, that every citizen is involved in the politics of this country. Some of the things that she's done, she's, as many of you know, she was the only woman to serve as the president, I think, of the NAACP. She's was the first black president of the Women's City Club. She set up the testimony for Fletcher versus Coney Island. All of you in Cincinnati remember the desegregation of that amusement park. And so she was the chair of the NAACP Legal Defense Committee. She also set up or was co-chair of the NCCJ organization, which was a community relations committee during the riots, which some of us remember, not all you young people. She was the first black woman to be elected to city council. She's served as a member of the board of trustees of the university. She's president of Links. She's on U.S. civil rights. I'm not sure whether she's still on these things or whether she's done them and finished, but she was on the U.S. Civil Rights Commission for the Ohio Advisory Committee. She's given thousands of dollars in scholarships to minority female students. She's a present member of the advisory board of WGUC. She was a member of WCET's board. She was on the Planned Parenthood board. She was the Affirmative Action Committee chair for the city of Cincinnati. And she was on the desegregation task force for the Cincinnati Public Schools. She's got lots of, you all remember she ran for the Board of Ed too. She has received many, many awards. The Ohio Women's Hall of Fame, NAACP President's Award for Outstanding Leadership, Ohio Black Leadership Women's Award, Baptist Ministers Conference Award for a life dedicated to the fulfillment of the dream of Martin Luther King. She provided leadership in the fight to maintain and return proportional representation as a voting method here in Cincinnati. She's led those campaigns in '88 and '91 for the return of PR. Unfortunately, we didn't quite win, but it wasn't Marian's fault. Actually, no one has worked harder for or done more to promote proportional representation in Cincinnati than has Marian. And all of us who know Marian know that we can be discussing anything from telecommunications to whether or not Sanskrit should still be taught, and somehow Marian will get the conversation around to proportional representation. So it's with great pleasure that we present Marian with the third annual Champion of Democracy Award.
I'm in very illustrious company, and I'm very humbled to be so honored. I do believe in proportional representation. I think it's important that we have diverse groups representing and voting for our leadership in every single election. I think that's one way we move toward a functioning democracy and keep it functioning. So from my vantage point, 74, almost 75 years, I say thank you for the opportunities I've had to serve. And to serve with people like this, and to see young Lani Guinier taking the lead in our tomorrows. Thank you for tonight. You don't look it.
Nor does she act it.
That's a part of the scam. I think we are coming to an end of this evening, but I want to say Ted has not had his say. And we can't close without hearing from him. Ted?
Thank you very much, Marian, and members of the caucus and group that sponsored this reception and occasion for presentations. I think we can dwell for a moment on a little history and at the same time acknowledge the fact that proportional representation somehow or other shaped my own career, both as a lawyer and as a public servant seeking the approval of the electorate for office. In 1939, Carl Rich, Republican prosecuting attorney, appointed me an assistant to the prosecutor. Within a matter of a few months, I was approached by the spokesman for the Republican Party, directing me to participate and give some support to the repeal of PR in the election of 1939. I refused to, as I said, be the bellwether to lead the sheep to slaughter, because it was only under PR that the Negro community had obtained representation in the city council. At that time, Jesse Locker was an incumbent in the council. Frank Hall had been elected in 1941. I offered to resign my position as prosecutor if that was the price for the job, but it was not accepted because it would create some adverse publicity. So I survived, but was marked as an unwilling, unresponsive, irregular Republican. In 1942, Jesse Locker was elected again. And in 1947, Jesse Locker, an incumbent who had been elected several times, cast a vote in the council to put on the ballot the initiative, the resolution to repeal proportional representation as a method of electing councilmen. This, in my opinion at that time, and still is, a repudiation of the constituency's interest. And therefore, I undertook to run as an independent candidate for council, to focus attention on the campaign issue as to whether or not proportional representation should be retained or lost. The issue was saved, but the election was lost insofar as electing to council. I was not elected that year, but there was sufficient number of voters that cast first choice votes for my candidacy to indicate that there was some responsive body of opinion in the Negro community as to their desire to have representation of their choice serving in the city council. 2 years following that, the charter committee endorsed me as a candidate for council, to which I succeeded in being elected in 1949, assuming office in 1950. That background is only to illustrate the fact that proportional representation, which was used in Cincinnati for 32 years as a method for electing members to council and the governance of this city. It is the fairest system, it is the most accurate, and it can be attested to by the challenge to the method of counting and requiring a complete recount of the election in which John J. Gilligan, who is still here, I believe. Jack, are you here? Defeated Al Jordan, who was Labor's candidate, and Al Jordan requested, because of the narrowness of the loss, requested a recount. And there was a recount of the entire election results without any variation in either the number or the percentage of the votes that successfully elected John Gilligan. It is true that what we need is a body of public opinion to restore proportional representation as a method of electing members to City Council. It is encouraging that the Center for Voting and Democracy had its founding meeting here in Cincinnati. It is a historical fact that proportional representation was the method for electing council and the quality of the councilman, so that for 32 years we enjoyed the reputation and the image of being one of the best governed cities in this country. Now, we are not alone. We had it longer than any other city. Toledo had it for a time. Cleveland had it for a time. New York City had it for a time and repealed it on the communist issue because Ben Davis was elected to New York City Council. But the fact remains that the quality of representation can be improved by greater participation of citizens in the election of their representative. It can provide for diversity. In short, by the testimony of academicians throughout the country who study methods and systems of voting, that the great majority favor and recommend proportional representation as a measure that is both fair, it is equitable, and it is accurate. With all of that, we are standing on the threshold of another recurrence in which public opinion needs to express itself, and those who are impressed by the statistics and the records that the center is now distributing in their monthly newsletter of the communities that are turning to selective representation method of voting. It's extremely fortunate, historically, that Lani Guinier has taken the front position in being the advocate for forms of election that will provide not for necessarily districting or gerrymandering, but a system that by the use of it will provide for both the balance and the fairness of the method of electing representatives in legislative bodies. In this past election, 37 minority members in Congress were re-elected. Many of them are elected from districts which are subject to the charge that it is gerrymandering in a manner which is not consistent with the Constitution, and they will contend with more vigor that it does not support and enhance the implementation of the Voting Rights Act. So that we are at the threshold of a new day in which that issue may again be placed before Cincinnati voters. I do not know what the present commission to review the charter is going to recommend. I would hope that they would recommend that proportional representation or some selective method could be used as a form for electing council, and it does not necessarily follow that a popularity contest determines the leadership that Cincinnati needs. So that I want to thank my fellow citizens for lending your support by your attendance here tonight. I want to congratulate Marian for her recognition along with me as a champion of democracy, and she has the energy and I have the experience.
Energy and experience, man.
Marian, I remember I built a house in 1940, and it provided for two one-bedroom apartments on the first floor and a six-room apartment on the second floor, which was to be my home. And the first tenants that moved into that house were Marian and Don. They've been under my wing ever since.
Very productive week.
We want to thank you, and I want to thank you on behalf of my family, and particularly Johnny May, who's here, who's not enjoying the best of health, but she's still loyal in attendance. And I want you to know that every success that I had in every election was due to Johnny May's organization and selection of poll workers.
Right.
This is a good meeting. I see a lot of friends who helped me over the years, and I see a lot of new young people. And we need to reach into that group and generate a movement that will electrify Cincinnati and mark its true place in history as a place for good government and a good system to afford citizens an opportunity to participate. Thank you very much.
I'm on the Charter Review Commission. I welcome your advice.
Miserably. as you may know, but
How's your business?
have certainly been interested in election reform in the city. And the reason why I supported cumulative voting at the time, in contrast to PR, was that it was much easier to explain and to understand than proportional representation. I have to say, in my experience on the council, I've come to be a supporter.
We're same side of Madison. We're the first house.
When I see it, it just seems as if it is the best system. It's tough to get people to understand it, but it's certainly a more representative and a more democratic approach to things.
So what do you think of calling it the smart ballot?
Well, it's catchy. It's catchy. Although I guess after you get beyond that,
You still have to explain.
you still have to explain it.
Yeah, but at least you may get people interested in hearing what you're saying.
If you come right out and say proportional representation, already you've lost them.
Or STB,
That's
or
right.
single transferable vote.
Yes. Well, I'm very pleased to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time if you bend a little, I can get a better picture.
Oh, terrific. Thank you.
It's not working like I'm not that good at the Great, thank you.
Well, now you should meet Mrs. Lemon.
Well, how are you? I heard you earlier today at the university. I didn't have a chance to hear the questions and answers where you dovetail with what was it, the biologist?
Yes.
How did they get that together, the two of you, about equity?
Well, they didn't really, but it was about race and it was about diversity. And what I thought was the two of us notion that biological diversity can lead to innovation, that we don't have to fear variations. We can embrace them because it's through mutations and variations in terms of evolutionary biology that you develop survival of the species.
I was wondering, I heard you had a cultural speech, right to the point, and I heard him, and I said, how are we going to get up? I was really, and I couldn't stay to hear the
Well, my only disappointment is that there wasn't more time for questions and answers, because that's my favorite part of any talk.
It was very interesting. You had a nice group of students there,
Yes.
I noticed.
Yes.
And you must be very tall.
Yes, that too.
I'm going to correct my mistake. It is not Johnny Mathis was at Washington High School. They were there in school at the same time. But she wanted you to know that Channing and Brown, the governor, are graduates.
Oh, okay.
So you can use that. I want to make sure.
Thank you.
I didn't want to tell you the wrong thing.
Thank you. What's her name?
Her name is, she's a Charlotte. She's principal of high school in Charlotte. Jan. Her nickname is Jan. They call her Charlotte Jan James. She lives right down the street, but she was so tired she couldn't come tonight.
And she's the principal?
Principal at Losantaville School here in Cincinnati. Has her doctorate, LOSAN. And I hear when you mentioned it,
right.
Well,
I saw the New York Times had a mention of today's time.
Oh, really?
Yes.